Great. And I'm admitting everyone now.
Welcome, 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 welcome.
Nice to see those faces.
Thank you for coming. Welcome. We're gonna get right started. People are gonna keep coming in, I'm sure, but I don't want to waste our hour with Bessel and with Stephan.
So on the line. That's good.
So I would like to acknowledge our indigenous lands that I am upon. If you'd like to put your in the chat room, please feel free to do that. I'm on the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Peoria. Welcome. I would like to also, this is a Shakespeare in Prison conference, so many of us are displaced. We're out of our prisons. Some have no relationship with them at all, so it's lonely. So I'd like to do this piece in tribute to all of our men and women and young people that are behind the razor wire without us. Death of reasonable excuses. When will we dance again? E.C. Brooks lockdown. Early March, 1st to 5th. Steel gray sky. Abortive spring yet to arrive. Word. When will we dance again? Traveling on a freight train from the West Coast, Pacific cruiser, riding the rails. When will we dance again? Absent from week's previous prison visit, a side trip to Huntsville, Alabama's Limestone Penitentiary. When will we dance again? March 11th, 2020, the last day, banned from E.C. Brooks Correctional Facility. When will we dance again? A band of brothers on ice with a glass of zingy jalapeno tomato vegetable juice, with a splash of Tabasco horseradish sauce, with a double shot of COVID-19 killer cocktail behind reflective blood red razor wire. When will we dance again? Virus lying in wait in civilians' parking lot. When will we dance again? War of the worlds, battle in the pandemic and science, conspiracy theory versus common sense. When will we dance again? Virus at the front desk, signing in, concealed as a padre, round the neck, sporting a hanging noose, thick gold rope chain, NBA styling, hangs a gold cross, adorned with chipped ruby red stones, marks of dishonor. When will we dance again? Floating through each checkpoint, breathe and exhale on disbelieving COs, masks below their noses, COVID-19, filling up each room like an air mattress, trapping polluted air, leaving behind death's calling card. When will we dance again? Through the window of time, gazing back at the circle of trust, each purple plastic chair filled with eager anticipation, exuberant expectation. When will we dance again? The circle of trust, like thin ice on a schoolyard pond, fractures into pieces, reassembling a jigsaw puzzle. The visage in each chair, a brother. With the tick-tock endless passage of time, a puzzle piece is lost, leaving a hole in the memory of the circle of trust. When will we dance again? We're delighted that you're here with us. Thank you. I hope you were able to view Bessel's presentation, beautiful presentation of his work. If you haven't got his book, what's this, 113, week 113 or something?
115 now.
Yeah, 115. Not that you're keeping score, Bessel, but that's okay.
Yeah, I don't pay attention to this.
But it's an amazing book. I've read many trauma books over the years, and I say truthfully, and not just because Bessel's here, that it's the best book on trauma I've read. I've learned so much from it. Also, we have Stephan Wolfert of Cry Havoc, who's worked with Bessel, and who has his own story and his beautiful truth of working with veterans over the years, saving not only his own life, as he'll tell you, but saving the lives of so many others. So we would like for you to put your question. I hope you have lots of questions. Put it in the chat, And then we've got Scott's here. He's looking at it if I'm not able to look at it, and he will call you out, such as he'll say, Franny, I see you have a question, and then you will turn your microphone on and enter into the conversation. So if you don't want to do that, we'll read your question, but that's fine. So I want to start it out with the first question. And I want to hear from Bessel about ways when someone is triggered, what are the ways that can help with that? In my circle, I teach them the 4-step breathing, 5 seconds inhale, hold, 5 seconds exhale, hold, right? They're all trained in that. And what happens is we see it happening, we use heartbeat. So Bessel, talk to us about that.
Well, it's a great question and a very central question, in that when you open up trauma, you open up Pandora's box. That trauma is about something, it's not a story. Trauma is about a traumatic event that rips you apart, that overwhelms you. And so if you start opening it up, you go back to where you were then. And if you are anything but extremely careful, you'll re-traumatize people by having them go through it again. And going through it again in an unregulated form is a new trauma. And that's really what post-traumatic stress is about, is that old thing keeps repeating itself. So one of the two critical issues of our trauma treatment is to help people to go to that edge, but help them to stop. And so anybody who messes around with trauma needs to be really good in regulating themselves. And as you pointed out already, breathing is a very important piece of it. Tapping acupressure points would be a very important thing. I would suggest in general, don't do this work unless you know how to tap acupressure points, and unless you first practice self-regulation. So don't go into the trauma. There's no virtue in opening up all the horror and the misery of one's past unless you're ready to deal with it. In other words, until your brain is in a calm enough state so you can distinguish between the past and the present. And that is the whole core of trauma treatment, is to possibly revisit the past, but in a frame of mind that makes you feel safe. I just saw something that Stephan did in DE-CRUIT, and it was just a beautiful example of very, very gently people leading into finding their voice, finding their internal self, and then very carefully saying what needed to be said. But this is dangerous work. And to my mind, it's very much like doing neurosurgery, and you don't do neurosurgery without going to medical school first. I mean, this is not easy stuff. You know?
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, Bessel. I've been doing this 26 years, and I still don't consider myself an expert, but I have lots of experience. But what I found is our field is really exploding, and a lot of people are getting into prison work. I think, again, my opinion, I think you're getting into it for the wrong reason, and then they're getting into it without understanding trauma. It's why I recommend your book so highly, because it's written in language anyone can understand. But again, I want to kick it to Stephan. Stephan,
let me give you my association to Richard Pryor did this wonderful skit on going to Arizona State Prison, filled with good intentions, and then he says, as only Richard Pryor could do, he pulls his hair and said, "Oh my God, get me out of here with all these motherfuckers." And I'm sure this happens regularly when people go into prison with the best of intentions. You deal with people who lose control over themselves, and that's why they're in prison. And so the issue of how do you calmly, gently, very carefully do that stuff is a big thing. And so
I kick it to Stephan, my brother Stephan, who I've had the good fortune of sitting in on his circles and watching how he handles that beautifully. Stephan.
What could you help narrow? What do you mean?
Okay. So what I'm interested in, you are a sufferer of trauma, right? Yeah. So sometimes you get triggered. It makes you very sensitive to others and stuff. So what is there a way that you have when somebody is in a trauma, locked in trauma, how do you help to ameliorate that? How do you help to take comfort in them?
Yeah, I think like nearly anything, the preparation before is key. So for us, we very, very clearly create the container within which we're going to operate. So if it's 3 hours, for example, we have a clear ritual at the beginning and a clear ritual at the end, so that with some buffer time after, trying to eliminate these, this colonial construct of, well, 15 minutes for this and 20 minutes for that. And who gives a rat's ass if it's bringing up all your childhood shit? We're going to move on to the next thing. It's The container is the container for whatever it needs. And then the second thing is, and this is the thing we're running into the most with training DE-CRUITers, is getting the hell out of the way, that it's not about me, that it's not about me, my trauma or my stuff. It's about being there to hold the container. The breath work that you talked about is the absolute foundation. I mean, because we're a theater program, the foundation of everything that we do is in the breath and then leading to the language. So just having a whole room that can actually stand in what we call the toddler pose, with, like belly out, like a toddler, and breathe in deeply and breathe out. That alone causes immediate issues. Issues is the wrong word. It causes releases, causes upset. So we start very, like Bessel said, we start very slowly, work on the very foundations, so that when we have that way, if someone goes into crisis, there are multiple mechanisms to help bring them back from crisis, if that's what they desire. Sometimes they want to live there for a little while and then come back. But so then the breath, the rituals that we've established of how to get to that breath, and the room, the group, actually helping them back. And then, of course, the container at the end, a ritual to end the evening, which is very often physical contact with ourselves or others, singing, light lifting things that cause vibrations in the body to release all of that. I hope that answers.
Yeah, it did.
Let me say something else still. The issue of touch. Touch is a very, very powerful regulating thing, and that's how we regulate little kids and how we regulate our friends. And so I would encourage you very strongly to explore the issue of touch. So in our Shakes and Code training, we use a lot of touch, we explore a lot of touch, and I would, if you do your theater work, really explore what touch does to people. And explore before you open up anything, see who people like to be touched by, what sort of touch is good for them, like maybe between their shoulder blades or maybe their arms. But you can really regulate people very powerfully with touch, but it needs to be done before you actually open up the trouble, but also make it available as a way of calming yourself down and feeling safe. And some people may really like touch, and other people will be very triggered by touch. And it's important for us to know for whom that's true and for whom it isn't true.
And what happens when you work in a self-contained circle like us in prison, that the guys take that knowledge back to their housing units, and they become healers in their housing unit, because they know which guys are triggered with trauma, and they teach them the breathing. And they teach them the heartbeat, and they're there, so they know who to go to, because we have guys in every one of the housing units, and they become almost like shamans, knowing how to deal with that. So I think it's essential. Scott, someone have a question?
Yeah, I want to call Carla into this space. Come on in, Carla.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, Curt, for being a founder of this network. I just want to take a moment to say thanks to everybody who's showing up. This network has been so good for my trajectory in this work. Thank you. I wanted to relay a little story, or half a story, and ask you to speak to it, of something that happened in class. So I do a theater program at the women's prison in Oregon, and we alternate between devised and scripted work. In this particular time, we were working on 12 Angry Women, and the women in the class were having a very difficult time with memorization. And we set up a class for everyone to take their longest little bit of script. And the piece is in 12 Angry Women. It's mostly a dialogue, pop, 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 back and forth. So nobody had this grand to be or not to be speech. It's just very short. But take your longest piece of text, bring it to class, and we'll do it for each other. That's it. And so the day comes when we're doing this and we're going through them. And one woman, when she gets up to do her piece, she keeps tripping. She starts over. She gets lost. She can't remember. Her physical body, her breathing becomes real shallow, and her eyes get really wide, and she's cutting glances at the door. And eventually she's just like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm having a ringing in my ear, like right before I pulled the trigger. And for her particular reason for being in prison was for shooting at someone. So I think I'll stop the story there and just have you speak to that, because it was a really big moment for us. And then if you want to hear the conclusion, I would love to tell you that too.
Well, my immediate reaction is, as most of you probably know, is that anything can be triggering. And you don't need to give a particularly dramatic text. For example, in Shakespeare Co, we do Lady Macbeth. I say, if he had also resembled my father. And the word father can drive you crazy. And I've seen people go crazy just saying my father. And so my reaction to it is you go as really slowly of just saying one word and calming yourself down, and saying one word and calming yourself down. Probably much slower. I mean, I'm a therapist and you're a theater director, and those are not the same people. You're not a therapist and I'm not a theater director, although I get confused about it sometimes. But you want to see a production, and all I want to see as a therapist is for a person to tolerate their own feelings. But of course, we run into each other at that particular juncture, is that people will get triggered. And that's part of the deal. I think that's part of why you do it, to make it safe for people to say something. And I think Curt and Stephan can probably say much more about that, because you run into it yourself all the time.
Curt, is it all right if I hop on?
Oh, please jump in, Stephan.
This is I love this, and I love that Bessel's here, because this is something we sometimes talk shop at your place there that you have in your backdrop, but we don't get to share with the rest of the world. The merging of these two, if you will, of the theater world and the therapy world, is that that's what I meant by the container. So everything is the container, including if they're about to do a monologue. And we have this a lot. And just for perspective on this, most of the people that I'm working with, what ends up coming out is the vast majority, I would say well over 90%, have unhealed, unspoken sexual trauma from their youth. And it's specifically sexual trauma in the military that I'm talking about, the veterans I'm working with, and higher in the males, by the way, generally, for our experience. So Bessel's right. Anything can trigger them. And our point, we don't make a goal of the language. We make a goal of being able to observe our physiological reaction without judgment. So instead of what my wife calls the shitty committee, all the voices saying you're not bad, you're not good enough, you're too this, you're not enough that, all of these voices that we heard from, whether it be teachers or our abusers or whomever, that we continue to give voice to. The way to silence them is this box breathing that you talked about, Curt. At least we found the grounding breathing, staying in the room by looking around, physical touch, and all of that before we even get to the language. I will often say, if I'm asking someone, I invite you to go next. And as soon as I see them react, we stop right there. We say, we'll ask, so what are you feeling? What are your thoughts and feelings right now? Not about I feel good, but I feel, butterflies in my stomach. I feel a ringing in my ear. I feel we then, we don't even worry about the text yet. We get into what do you feel? Where in your body do you feel it? When else in your life do you feel it? And eventually, when is the earliest in your life you felt that? So these are the 4 questions that we set as that container before they even speak the language, before they even speak about their own experience or Shakespeare. And then as they're going through the Shakespeare, we don't give a rat's ass what it means or what Harold Bloom thinks it means. All due deference to Harold Bloom, he's genius, but I want to know, what do you think it means when, like Bessel said, my father, as he slept, I had done. What does that mean to you? And let's stay with that physical experience that happened, a la Bessel's book, that physical experience that you're going through. The verse is a tool, not a goal. So that's my 2 cents on it.
One of the container things that I do is we learn to be or not to be. That is the question. And we march around the room to that beat. To be or not to be. That is the question. To be or not. So again, it's physicalization, it's breath, and it's a piece of Shakespeare's text. And they can take that back to their housing unit and they can use that. But I totally agree. The container is so important to know. And we also define early with new guys, do you like to be touched? Do you not like to be touched? So we understand, because some people need a hug. Some people don't need a hug. Bessel.
Yeah, I learned a very big lesson from Bill Watson, who runs Feast of Crispian in Milwaukee. And the first time I saw him work with veterans, he just had them say a very simple piece of a dialogue from Julius Caesar. And I thought, come on, have these guys act. Don't be so slow. And then what I started to realize is that just saying a sentence without falling apart was a gigantic thing for them. And just being able to just say that little phrase without falling apart, without whatever, is an enormous. So whether you actually finish the play may not be the critical issue, but being able to stand there and to say your lines, for many of these people who have never said their lines, is a gigantic issue.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So Carla, you want to give us...
Yeah, the conclusion of what happened.
And then we're going to jump to another question.
Yeah, because the framework of the circle, Curt, and that we had done so much ensemble building exercises prior to that moment, the circle engaged. And they immediately had her back and let her know she was safe in that moment, which was brilliant. And that everyone started talking about the amygdala and the fight or flight response, and that she was like, so I'm normal, like, it was the most beautiful thing. And I didn't do a thing. I just sat there, I was just holding the space, because like you said, I'm not a therapist. And it was just really beautiful. But thank each of you for sharing your tools that you use when stuff comes up, because stuff comes up. And I thank you for that. Thank you.
I think one of the essential things too is that I'm not there to fix them. They're there to fix themselves. It's my job to give them the tools to fix themselves. So I don't have advice for them. And that's essential to remember. I'm not there to save them. I'm white and I'm male. So I work with 80% BIPOC and 10% LGBTQ, right? I'm not there. It's important. Another question. Scott.
I'm called Sheila into the space. Sheila.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. I know many of you, not all. Bessel, I did your online workshop in September, the intensive. It was fabulous. But I also want to say, Curt always reminds me that I'm an academic. So I want to acknowledge that from the get-go, that I'm one of those English professor types. Be that as it may, I've been doing a lot of work I'm writing about a lot of different programs, both in prisons and with veterans and with ASL, Protactile, all of this, and really was impressed not only by your book, but also by the William McNeill book that you recommended, because it talked about things and integrating things together. And I'm sitting here now, I'm surrounded by books that are called things like Sound and Breath, which Scott recommended to me, and a field guide to the world's senses, and touch, and and yoga books and acting, Shakespeare and Company books, because I'm really trying to pull it together about the integration of the different senses and the power that comes from that for people who have access to all the senses. Because I don't know if you know about protactile work in Shakespeare, but that's done for deaf-blind participants. And so instead of the language and the visual, they're focusing on things like smell, so that in a production that I saw of Romeo and Juliet, they had incense, and then you knew it was Friar Lawrence because it was connected to a religious establishment. For the party where Romeo and Juliet met each other, they gave you you got on toothpicks, a marshmallow followed by an olive. So you had the two sides, that nothing wrong with a marshmallow, nothing wrong with an olive, but you don't want to put them in the same recipe.
Wow.
And anyway, so I'm wondering, are there other sources that you or Stephan or anyone can suggest that talk about this sort of integrated approach of the senses? Because again, and I've talked to Scott about this quite a bit, and practitioners are used to all this body work and breath work and all of that. Academics are all doing brain work, and therapy is something else again. But I'm really trying to see how they all come together and mutually reinforce each other and can come to the stronger outcomes. I know that's a lot of verbiage for me. I apologize for that.
Like an English professor. So.
Yeah.
You just proved my point.
Well, I'm fascinated that you as an English professor say that and leave out the language piece. And it's interesting that in my world, all people do is yak or take pictures of people's brains. And they leave out all the dimensions that you're talking about. Smell, sound, touch, which are really the core things that trigger people. It really are the sensations that upset people more than anything else. So I'm just delighted even that you go there. How far you go with that, I'll leave it up to the rest of the group, but I'm just impressed with your question. Yep.
Yeah, I can speak briefly. The thing is, and hi Sheila, it's nice to see you.
Hi.
For us, the things that we're trying to, so the short of it is, I'm patient 0 for DE-CRUIT. So I was just trying to help me. And it wasn't even fixed. It was like, what the hell's wrong with me? That's where Cry Havoc, my show, came out. It was trying to answer that question. And then what the hell's wrong? And then what can I do to change some of these things? And then it grew from there. So when people come in that want to teach DE-CRUIT, we talk about what you bring, what you're passionate about. Because the big thing we're trying to do, and how wonderful is this era right now, is trying to deindustrialize the way we teach shit as well. Instead of saying, no, this is the formula for everyone. I don't know what the formula is for everyone. It's show up, what speaks to you, and here are some resources to go further down that route. If it's something that I'm not familiar with or unable, and how can I connect you with people towards that path if that's more meaningful to you? We're always trying to integrate, but we're just at the foundational level. We're really just trying to get people half the time we're trying to make people aware that they might have trauma or might have attachment disorder. We're not even, I'm not getting people coming in saying, here's clearly what I have. I looked at the DSM, what I mean? They're like, I get a lot of veterans who come in who later admit that they were there to sabotage the group. So, and then end up staying and go, oh, damn, I forgot to sabotage it because it started having an effect on me. So, and the final thing I'll say is that because my passion is theater, we do everything with the foundation of theater, meaning what's great about theater as opposed to our former work as veterans is we get to try stuff and no one dies. It's and that's literal. That's what's nice about this group is when I say that it's not a joke, it's for real. And then they begin to connect it to their remember that their childhood stuff as it comes up. They're like, oh, I did survive. And just that realization is an integration. And then we begin to bring in as many things as they want. I don't know. I know I spoke very broadly to it, but in our case, it's theater is our foundation of let's try it. Let's try something. If someone's bringing something new into the room, yeah, absolutely. Let's give it a shot and see what happens. Because let me reframe, not give it a shot. Let's experience it and then respond from that experience. I hope that was helpful.
No, it is helpful. And also just to give a plug in advance, one of the things that really pushed me down this path was doing the work with the prison programs in India. And there'll be a session on that later in this conference. But because the environment around the correctional facilities in India is different than it is that the practitioners there, Mama Roy, who many people here know, and Hulamana Kadapali, whose name I always get wrong, from Sankalpa, they're bringing in art and yoga and breath work and painting and weaving and all of this other kind of stuff in a way because they've got sort of access all day. Like the practitioners can be with the same group for huge periods of time. And so they're bringing in all of these different their sensory things in a way that I was really struck by. And I'm now trying to make those connections with the kind of programs that you're doing and Curt's doing and all, Franny and Scott and Tom McGill and all these other wonderful people who are here. You're doing that as practitioners. And and I'm just trying to conceptualize it better.
Are you writing a book about it or something?
Yeah.
I can't wait to read it actually. Because that is really very, very innovative and important because as you say, everybody has their own little modality, but to really open things up to all the senses and how you can approach it would be very interesting for the rest of us to learn about.
Well, I appreciate that. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Another question, Scott?
Yeah, I would call JoJo into the space.
Hello. Thank you guys for being here. I'm so pleased to hear all this stuff about Shakespeare and Company. My question is, while I have you here, I would love to hear some of your wisdom about something that I'm having trouble with is that I'm relatively new to this kind of work. And I find myself getting a little bit of an evangelist about it. And I have people in my life, loved ones who I feel strongly would benefit from this kind of work, but I don't want to alienate them. I don't want to tell them I have the answer. You're wrong. You need fixing. I'm right. And the other thing I want to say is that, I see there can be a lot of strong reactions to the arts as well. So, I don't want to be an evangelist, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or wisdom about how to sort of gently support people in your life, and sort of if you have any thoughts about, because people have shit about the arts. They're like, it's it's this, it's that, So I hope that was clear. Yes, that's my question.
Personally, I cannot imagine why your relatives would not want to follow you because they see your enthusiasm and your passion. And I follow people who exude enthusiasm and passion. So what's wrong with your relatives? Like, hey, send it to somebody. Like,
If you can be anything else than an actor, be that.
I think also what happens is this: people that know you really well, I mean really well, notice when you change, when you evolve, right? So you don't have to advocate anything. You just have to be yourself, your authentic self. There are so many guys that join Shakespeare Behind Bars, and we ask why, and they'll say, because I saw so-so, who was the worst motherfucker on the, he just is, he was horrific. And then I saw him change, and I wondered what that change was and where it came from, and they joined because of that person. It's about just be authentic. You can also wear a t-shirt constantly that says heal thyself, heal thyself. Very good advice. Stephan, suggestion?
I don't know that I have. I wish I had something brilliant. I don't. I share that. My family is, I would say 98% of my family is right-wing Trumplandia. Arts are for, derogatory, insert derogatory term here. It's a hobby, not a profession. And I'm 53, about 54 in a week or two, and I didn't even follow my own birthday. But anyways, the point is that I feel like I've exhausted every avenue. I brought data because I have to go, Dawn and I will go to neighborhood councils around the country that we go to and say, look, the arts we're actually bringing more money into this country than agriculture. The arts are a massive, massive part of the GDP in this country, and yet we're pushed aside like it's a hobby. We're actually part of the origins of Bessel's work. The art actors were the original psychiatrists and psychologists. We were the original healers and medicine people, and that really hasn't changed in some cultures. And so that's why I go back to work with Native American theater since 2000. But no matter how much I learn, no matter how much I change, when I go to my family in particular and try to profess this, it falls on deaf ears. So at some point, I had to determine that I'm doing this for me, and anyone who wants to join me. And I agree. I agree with Bessel. I could have summed it up with saying, agreeing with Bessel is that what I'm passionate about, I speak to, and I surround myself with people who are passionate about that, or at least interested, because most of the veterans that come into the room do not want to be actors. Some do, a small percentage follow that path, but they're artists. Because again, as Bessel says in his book, traumatized people are creative people. So these people have been creative to survive. So they come into the room because they're creative. And that's why I go back to Sheila's point. I say, oh, maybe you want to connect with combat paper, or you want to connect with dance, Roman Bakken dance or something. But I end up, for my own health, I had to cut myself off from some of them, frankly. So maybe the best answer might be to cut your losses. I don't know.
Scott, another question?
Sure. We've got Franny. Franny, come on in. You're not muted, but your sound, there's no sound.
You hear me?
There you go.
It's my headphones. Thank you. I'm so excited to
a little closer to your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. Well, thank you. I'm glad you can hear me. So I'm just curious about any therapists or artists or practitioners or programs that are using Michael Chekhov's acting technique to as a way of helping folks stay safe while they're rehearsing and performing, since so many acting techniques can inadvertently or purposefully trigger trauma, and we've had a lot of success with it, and like we cannot be the only ones, but I have not found these people yet. So I'm wondering if you're aware of any work that's been going on with that, or I guess it's still not a question, but that's my question.
Franny, are you talking about psychological gesture?
It's the whole technique. Yeah. Like some of it is psychological gesture. There's a lot of, it's about drawing on your life experience in order to use your imagination and kind of psychological gesture, but also atmospheres and things that where you're able to be in your body and not in your mind, so that you are, instead of saying like, this Macbeth monologue reminds me of when I was in lockup, rather than putting yourself back in that place, you say, well, what reminds you of that or something? And this woman, this happened, saying, well, I felt really heavy, like my muscles were made of lead. And I said, well, let go of the memory and try the soliloquy with muscles made of lead. And then she did it perfectly. It was the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. It was perfect. And then we were all really moved, and we said, well, how was that for you? And she goes, I'm fine. That was great. So, and we've seen that happen a lot. So I'm curious I'm just curious. I'm always curious.
Tell us again what the technique is called.
It's Michael Chekhov technique.
Chekhov, as the Russian playwright.
His nephew, yeah.
Not Anton Chekhov. No, Michael Chekhov was one of the first descendants from Stanislavski. He was part of the Moscow Art Theater School and whatnot in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he was.
I'd have to say, for my own self, I'm an amalgam of many different techniques, not being thinking any of them wholly or the only way to do it. So I use bits and pieces. I use the psychological gesture with the guys, but I don't talk about it being Michael Chekhov. It's just try this, try that.
Right.
And I suspect that many of us are the same way. We're amalgams. We don't hold to any one practitioner. Not that you can't. Stephan?
Yeah, it's my opinion that pretty much the foundation of American acting has at least some derivative or influence or has been influenced by Chekhov, by Stanislavski. I think the very foundation of the work, even the way we teach Shakespeare, how to act Shakespeare, has at least bits and pieces from it. So I haven't done it specifically, and I'll share why as briefly as I can. That because I just I was in residence at Syracuse University, and there's these young actors coming in who are fantastically skilled. They've been taught all of the techniques. I mean, astoundingly so. I was really taken aback, and yet I felt that the technique and they teach Stanislavski there. That's why I bring it up. The technique had taken over everything else. That they were so worried about. They'd give this brilliant monologue, brilliantly personalized, and immediately collapse afterwards, waiting for the critique afterwards, which Scott and I talk about. It's absolutely eroding at acting and actors, I think, in this country. So I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Stanislavski. That it's a wonderful foundation, as Curt said. Just Bruce Lee, take what's useful, disregard the rest, add what's uniquely yours. In my opinion.
I don't want to run out of time before I ask Bessel, what role does self-forgiveness play in the healing process?
That's a very core question. It's not self-forgiveness, it is self-compassion. And the techniques that we use, and basically all of my current work, much of it, is about how do you get into yourself and see what that kid went through. That shit show, all this negative talk, there's all the residue of you being a little kid who's being beaten up and molested. And when you're a kid, you have no choice but to say, oh, this is happening to me because I'm a bad kid. There's not a single kid who gets beaten up who says, my mom or dad, they're crazy. I'm a beautiful child. How can they do this to me? Piagetian doctrine says, when something happens to you as a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old kid, that is you. So this is happening because you are a bad person. And so, my lab is doing psychedelic therapies these days, which is still illegal, so I not encourage you to go there yet. But when people are in these psychedelic states, they see themselves from a transcendental point of view, and they say, oh my God, look at that poor kid. I'll scoop that kid up. That kid needs to be protected. But as long as you are merged or blended with that little kid, you're going to always hate yourself. And so the critical issue, and I think theater can be very helpful with that, is to really help you to make that separation. And you see that so beautifully in Cry Havoc, make that separation between yourself then, who had the responses that you had to have as a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old kid, and you right now, who can jump in your car and get away from it, or can call the cops and do whatever. You're in a totally different position. And you really need to, on some very elementary level, become aware of the dual reality that you live on. You live in an adult reality. And so forgiveness is not quite a word that I like here. It is more like, no, compassion is the closest I get to it. To really say, that was a beautiful kid. That's sort of my own very therapist. My parents were not nearly as bad as many people know. But at the end of all the stuff I've done, go like, I'm so sad for my mom that she didn't really get to enjoy this beautiful kid who I was. Yeah. You know?
I like that. Thank you for that, Bessel. Because the number one thing that comes up in the prison circle for me, the number one thing is they want forgiveness. They want forgiveness, right?
But they have done terrible things.
Exactly. And so we start talking about, but I'll use your word, self-compassion. Let's find some compassion. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's the whole. It's the big term right now in trauma. It's the moral injury. And of course, the people you work with have moral injury, and I think it'd be helpful for them. And theater can be very helpful to see. Yes, I was this kid who didn't know anything, who just had impulses that were geared towards survival. And boy, did those impulses get me into trouble and hurt other people. And today, I wouldn't do that because now I live in a different reality. But you know, it's nothing simple there.
If you haven't seen Cracked Up, which is the film about Daryl Hammond, I would recommend seeing it. I find it one of the most courageous journeys a human being can take as he explores his trauma and comes really to discover what trauma he didn't even know was there. But it's a brilliant, brilliant film. Michelle Esrick and Bessel is in it. Scott, you have a question.
Oh, thanks, Curt. I am wondering about the power of vibrational therapies in terms of coming past or dispelling trauma on a almost cellular level. I've been on a journey with Kundalini Yoga. I'm 310 days, I think, into Kundalini sadhana. And so that practice contains mantra every day for an extended period of time. And what I found is in terms of the vibrations, the channels of vibrations of self-generated voice and vibration, that I have found pockets of physical trauma, most particularly in my throat, that I'm able to identify and then release. I'm wondering if there's any research to that, any avenues you might be able to point me down in terms of further research.
Well, what you raise is an interesting question, and that's the confine of what you can do if you want to keep your position. And so I've always pushed the envelope. When I started to do EMDR, people said, "Oh, God, it's deep end." When I started to talk about the body, people had gone off the deep end. And then after a while, did the research, and people, "Oh, it wasn't so bad after all." If I would start talking about vibrations, all my academic colleagues will go like, "Oh, he's really psychotic now. Put stuff in drinking water." So the research that people
hold on, Bessel, you've already proved that. So they already know all of that.
But the research we're doing right now is just touch. Mm-hmm. So after 40 years of doing this work, we're allowed, I give myself permission to explore touch. Nobody has ever studied touch. It's just the ultimate. So you talk about vibration, and I'm sure there's something there. But nobody like me, who has an academic degree, is going to go there because the world go like, they really lost it. That doesn't mean it's not true, you know? It's just what's culturally acceptable to talk about when you have an MD behind your name.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I know, like, I've studied a lot with polyvagal theory and things, and the idea of yoga, breath, singing. These things are all kind of interrelated when you're looking at this form of Kundalini. So thanks for that.
No, stay with it. Ask the question. Encourage people to investigate it. Maybe in 2030, you get your first study of vibrations.
Thanks, Bessel.
And one of the things, if you haven't read Bessel's book, the latter part of the book talks a lot about the arts, Shakespeare and yoga and martial arts and stuff too. So I think it speaks well to what we as practitioners are trying to do. I want to recognize Tom McGill, who's here, coming to us from Northern Ireland. He's really the impetus that started the first Shakespeare in Prison network. So it was bringing him to this country to do a little tour with me. He has a amazing movie called Mickey B, which is done in a prison with prisoners, and it's a riff on Macbeth. Thomas, you want to say hello to us from Northern Ireland, from Dublin?
Belfast.
Yeah.
Your geography right, Curt.
Thank you. I'm just excited to see you.
There's a map.
Still a smart ass.
It's great to be here, and it's great to see familiar faces. So I'm sorry I didn't check in before, in terms of the book and stuff. I've got the book, but I've only started it. So yeah, I mean, we were looking at something recently in relation to Ireland, the north of Ireland, and trauma, and this part of the world we have a lot of trauma here. Because of the conflict, and the conflict that has lasted for the last 40 years, 50 years. Some people would say the last 800 years, in terms of being England's first colony. So we deal with trauma quite a lot, and it's really interesting, to hear everybody's thoughts about it. And I remember once being in a room with Augusto Boal in Derry, and Boal asked a man in our group to take a chair, and the man burst out crying. And Boal stopped the group and said, "What's going on?" And basically it turned out that was what the police did when they were interrogating suspected Republican activists, and they would say, "Take a chair," and then they would pull the chair away, and then they would beat the person with the chair. So this man, so something as simple as take a chair. So we don't know what will cause trauma. We don't know what will cause a reaction, and it can be the most, innocent thing, like take a chair, and so. This is incredibly privileged work that we're doing, and it's a lot of the time we're kind of searching in the dark because we don't know, and we don't know what will trigger people, and we can just work with them to try and walk them through it. So there's my picture of Boal. There's Augusto Boal. And a much younger version of me. So I have Boal on my desk. I love him, and he was my mentor. So I learned so much from Boal about that. But I mean, I was going to say, one of the things that struck me way back doing this work when I began doing it, I got this offer to work with a group of medically retired prison officers and widows. And so one of the guys, basically it was tell them, how can you be of service to them, you know, in terms of filmmaking? And so we said, well, what do you want to make a film about? And so this man said, he was a prison officer. I want to make a film about my experience as a prison officer who was medically retired. And he said, and I said, well, what's your story? He said, well, I was in the Maze prison, which was the most secure prison in Western Europe. And it was a political prison. And he was captured and tortured for 3 days. And he wanted to recount that story. And so I had a dilemma. I was like, and I said, and where do you want to tell that story? He said, in the prison. So I had a huge dilemma. You know, what do I do? What do I do? And so I reached out to people, and they said to me, look, if he wants to tell the story in that context, then you got to let him do it. So we brought him back into the prison, and he told the story, and he was very, very upset. His heart rate was pumping. His pupils were dilated. He was breathless. He recounted the whole horror story of what happened to him, and we filmed it. And then at the end, I said to him, well, Billy, are you glad you've done that? And he closed the door. He closed the door of the prison, the gate. And he said, I've left the ghosts of the past behind me. And so I realized in that moment, it's when we give people access to telling those stories. And so it's a kind of question, and it's a kind of thing that we, you know, that I constantly come up against. And it's a tightrope that we walk, because when we encourage people, or we try to facilitate people to tell their stories, and usually the stories that they tell are traumatic stories, the fear is always, what happens if they fall into it? You know, what happens if the fear is re-traumatizing people. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, are there any other, you know, what kind of safety measures or mechanisms or can we put in place, while at the same time honoring the people that we're working with? Because sometimes, very often, healthcare professionals say to us, don't go there, don't do that, don't raise that issue with that person, stay away from that, don't do that. And so that's where I'm torn sometimes, you know, right, between those two things.
I think it's another great, thank you for, because I think telling the story in and of itself is not all that useful. But it reminds me of Carla's story and her person falling apart and then getting a new response to it. So when you replay it under new circumstances, with new people, under new conditions, in a new role, it widens up. Yeah, your trauma makes you more aware, constricted, and telling the story over and over again doesn't do very much. It only sort of engrafts it further. And the beauty of theater and doing it in groups is that you have new experiences where, for example, you are a different character, and now you make a larger context, because trauma is very narrow, and at the core, what happens in the brain is that your experience doesn't get associated with other experiences, so it lives there by itself. And then if you have a new experiences of telling it in a prison and walking out and having somebody hug you, then you have a new expanded consciousness in a way. But our job is to expand people's consciousness, not to just drive them back into it.
No, yeah. Bessel, if I can just pick up on that, because the other word that you used was separation. I use film. I was trained in theater, but now I use film. And so in using film, when we use film, people can see themselves and their experiences separate on a screen, away from them, a distance. We could create a critical distance between them and the experience. And I've seen that many, many times, where people have had revelations watching themselves and saying, oh God, is that how I behave? Is that what I do? Right. Is that me? You know, and so they can get huge revelations and insights into their own behavior from getting the separation and the distance and getting that experience on a screen. So that's why, I mean, I love film, and sometimes I feel like, wait a minute, I no longer practice theater. I practice film. And so, you know, we use film to record experiences now. You know, and we find it very beneficial and therapeutic and cathartic.
My gut goes with, I prefer theater because it's more flexible. And you can do things differently every time. So, what I love about theater is you never play the same role twice. I've seen Cry Havoc 15 times, and I see new performance every time.
And the thing I love about film is people can be present in their absence.
That's also, there's the other piece is you need to have the separation of that was then and this is now. So you know, because the issue of time is a very critical issue of because when you're traumatized, it's happening to you right now. And so the big challenge, neuroscientifically speaking, is how do you get that brain part online that can say, yes, this happened to me 15 years ago. It's not happening to me right now. And you don't do that by logic.
No.
So you need to get it, you tweak that part of the brain needs to come online to go like, oh, it's not happening right now, but I really feel bad for what happened back then. But how to do that is not easy.
Well, Bessel is running his own conference and stepped away to come and be with us. So I want to be very, very cognizant of his time. Thank you, Bessel, for your wisdom. And we love you. We appreciate you. And thank you. I love you
too. I think you guys are so refreshing for me, what you're doing and how creative you are. And it's marvelous. I wish that therapists would all come and learn from you. Okay. Thank you.
Send them to us. We won't fix them, but we might heal them.
Right. Okay, good. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bessel. And I also want to thank Stephan. I'll Scott and I'll hang around, and I hope Tom McGill will hang around for further chat. But Stephan's wife is at another conference. I'm doing 3 conferences this week, so it's juggling. But Stephan, love you. Thank you so much for your wisdom.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, truly, for the work you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Well, and thank you for being healthy again, Stephan.
Yeah.
Although, you know, Scott just had to run a workshop by himself while the Capitol was blowing up.
I know.
That's a beer story. That's going to be a beer story.
It's unreal. As I was able to kind of pick my head up and open one eye from the headache and the angst, the pain, I was able to go, oh my God, the world's falling apart. And I would just curl back into my pillow.
and Scott had us all take deep healing breaths.
It's needed.
Yeah, if there are little pockets of light, maybe it will transcend that ocean of dark that happened.
It is. You know, Curt, I had written you and said, never mind. Can I say actually one more?
Yeah, please. You
know, because we talk about the container, and the question I've been asked is why the container? And there's a lot of reasons. And to be honest, I don't know that I knew, but I'm starting to understand perhaps one of the main reasons why a container. And it's because of what Bessel talked about with the MDMA treatment. I actually have done it. I don't have a license to lose. I can advise it. It allowed me the same thing that theater does, which is it allowed me to lean into things I was dealing with. It allowed me to lean into deep feelings, and I don't mean the compassion feelings. I mean the dark ones. My MDMA experience was not a positive one in the regards of it was like, oh, ecstasy. It was horrible. It was really, really rough. So was my getting sober. So is my almost every day. So it gave me enough aesthetic distance, as we call it in theater. And I think theater does the same thing. And if we have that distance, we're able to lean in with a little more, dare I say, safety, but I mean that more like security. We can lean into the feelings that we're feeling. I was able to lean into that not only the self-loathing that I struggle with, but then eventually the self-compassion, or some, for me, it was too far, but some perhaps self-acceptance. And it allowed me to really lean into each of those with a level of safety. Both theater does that and the MDMA. And it seems to me that that's why we're trying to create the container, is an experimental little lab for mimesis, where people can go in and go, all right, I feel really horrible about myself. Let me lean into that a little further and see what comes up. And I think that goes to your point too, Scott and Curt, about we're not trying to fix people. We're just creating a space for people to work on themselves. That's it. And to go in there and lean into that. If you'll pardon the term, I mean that as, I don't mean it politically. I mean quite literally an actual experience of, I'm feeling that, let me grab onto it, because we run from it so much. What's the first thing that happens when people cry? We tend to see people go, shh, 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 to shush it instead of, let that shit out. Add sound to that, add words to that, add physical gesture to that. And that's what we're creating, is a space for that.
And almost all the time with emotion, right? They apologize for the emotion. It's like, you don't apologize for the emotion, feel it,
Right, to the point about Chekhov, feelings are a byproduct. They're not a goal. Right. No. I mean, when we're doing Chekhov, it's not, feel badly here, cry here. It's, can I make that person cry? Can I make that person feel, it's about, So it's feelings, to have them and feel them deeply, thoroughly, and then release it, travel through it and go, oh, I survived it. Then in our work, the body begins to understand, oh, I can trust this person again. Mm-hmm. I can trust that they are going to take care of me, that we can go to places we haven't gone before and then survive it. And that's the key, because there's that part of our survival mechanisms are strong and well developed. So
it's also why Bessel, I think, titled his book, The Body Keeps the Score, right?
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you have justified for me, and perhaps for my deceased parents, my experimentation with peyote in the early 70s. So thank you.
I've talked to Stephen Porges, to Bessel, to some of the icons about when I left the Army and I moved to Montana. When I left the Army, it was ill separation, shall we say. I did mushroom, and I've never done mushrooms. I did mushrooms like it was my job, and everyone, including myself, feel that it was a huge factor in helping my transition. Wow. It was a huge factor, because I left the Army in absolutely PTS state. I left it in full-blown crisis. And we all agreed that the mushrooms helped me with on some level, that transition out of it. For real.
For real.
Yeah. It's interesting too that you use the word container.
Yeah.
I'm using it kind of in a different place, but in terms of my yoga practice and that self-care practice, that you're creating a container that is visible to you, so that when you go to places that you don't necessarily want to be, you remember, I have this container that I can go to, and it kind of, you always know the water's fine in that container, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. That is rehearsal. Mm-hmm. Rehearsal is a container. That's where I bought, again, so this is where theater, I'm like, the next thing I did after the mushroom occupation, I went into grad school, and I had no theater training whatsoever. So I was seeing that on day one, it was like feeling around in a room in the dark for the light switch. And then, after a few days, I was able to find it. And each day I was able to find it more quickly, because I could go deeper, because the rehearsal was a container. I felt safe enough to go deeper into my emotions, deeper into my thoughts, deeper into my personal experiences publicly for other people, because they had created a container that in theater we call rehearsal, whatever you want to call it. It's just this beginning and end unit to where we can go much further, much faster with people we trust.
Our container in Shakespeare Behind Bars is called the Circle of Trust.
Yeah.
So the Circle of Trust is the first thing that we build before we ever get to text or Shakespeare. And so that's our safety, is the Circle of Trust. And we have shared values that we develop with each person putting their highest value. And then we honor those values. And obviously, number one value in prison is what happens here stays here.
With that, I'm going to leave you with my signature exit to everyone, but I mean it sincerely, which is thank you all for doing the impossible with the inadequate for the ungrateful. And it's sincere because it feels like that some days and a lot more lately. So truly, but I do have to run. Thank you, Curt. Thank you, Scott.
Love you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank
feel
you,
better.
Stephan.
Yeah, good to see you, man.
You too.
Interestingly,
Tommy, I'm so glad to see you.
oh.
I'm
good to be
glad
here.
you moved from Dublin to Belfast. I'm glad you're in Belfast now.
It was a long
it is.
time in coming.
Are you in Belfast right now?
Yeah. I'm at home.
Oh, my dad.
Yeah.
My dad was born there.
And I want to recommend Tom's website. The work that he does now, primarily with mental health, about making these films is exquisite, extraordinary, brilliant. And if you haven't seen Mickey B, see Mickey B. And eventually, we're doing another film when he gets the damn script done. And
It's
about
done.
The script is done, I thought.
Done.
Yeah.
Done.
I never
So-
believe anything out of his mouth until I actually see it in real form, because he's told me many lies over the years, and it's blames it on being Irish and drinking Irish whiskey with just a couple of drops of water, Curt. Just a couple of drops of water.
He used to drink whiskey with neat, sinful practice.
And but wait a minute, Tom, because you can't take credit. Who enlightened you about this methodology of drinking Irish whiskey?
Drinking it.
With just a drop of water, Curt.
Now, who was it?
You told me it was a brewer. It was
at the
distiller.
Bushmills Distillery. Yeah, Bushmills Distillery, 1608. The Bushmills Distillery. Yeah.
So we're in a hotel room in the midst of winter after the first Shakespeare in Prison conference, and Tom gets a bottle of Bushmill, comes into the room, and he pours it. I'm his, look, you're the guest, so I poured mine first, and I was about to take a sip of it, and he stopped me. No.
What are you doing?
So then he did the taste test, right? I had one where I had it neat, one where I put just a couple of drops of water.
No, half and half, Curt.
Yeah, half and half.
Half and half. That's what you need.
And it was
no
better.
ice.
I had to admit
No ice.
that he was right.
No.
It's difficult, but I had to admit it.
but
But please see his work with film. It's just, oh my God, it tears my heart out every time.
Well, thanks for that, Curt. Appreciate it, man. And no, everything's good. Everything's good here. So we're working away. We've got 2 projects live at the moment, which is just incredible, so we're still working away. And we got a funding bid in to do a 3-year project in a medium secure unit with forensic mental health patients.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So we should know probably mid-February, so that's a 3-year project. At the moment, the unit's locked down, and there's nobody getting in or out. Yeah. And but I mean, it bodes well for us, So we've been around a while now. This is 21 years this year. So it's just incredible. I know. So it's great seeing familiar faces and new faces,
I'm
Wait,
curious.
so how do I find out about that? Sorry.
Go ahead, Judah.
Curt, did someone post the link? How do I learn more about the work that you're doing?
Oh, I just did. I
put it on
in the chat.
In
In
the
the
chat.
chat.
Okay, great.
I'm curious what the temperature's like over there now that Brexit is done. Did you get your Irish passports?
I've had mine for years.
Yeah.
So our whole family has Irish passports. So the thing about Brexit is when the UK told enough lies via Facebook to its citizens about Brexit and that these hordes of immigrants were going to be coming to the country and taking over jobs. So when they convinced enough of the population to vote, Turkey's voting for Christmas, basically. And so now they're realizing, oh, wait a minute, there's no pâté foie gras on the shelves, or there's no camembert. What are we going to do? Do you know? We can't get camembert anymore, or brie, for God's sake, and parmesan. Do you know? So it's, you know, it's just nuts. Yeah, but we're, you know, in Ireland, it's really quite interesting because you know, we're on the island, and you know, the southern part of the island is still part of the EU. So and they say, oh no, there'll be no border. So I heard them on the radio today, you know, and basically the DUP, which is like the Republican Party kind of, you know, 400 years ago.
Yeah, Tea Party. It's like the Tea Party, yeah.
Say the Tea Party, yes. So they're like saying, oh, no, there is no border. There is no border, you know. So it's like, it's just, it's all going to play out. I mean, and the hurt's going to come, you know, and, but in terms of job losses, and in terms of, you know, businesses going under, it's just happening. And people are just desperate, you know. Hospitality industry's gone, theater, you know, all the theater has gone. It's all dark. Musicians, it's just I don't know. And then firms are stopping delivering to Ireland as well, you know, to the north. Some firms have said, we're not going to pay tax on that. Do you know, why should we deliver, you know? So the implications are just coming out now, and it's a crazy time, but we're doing okay. You know, we've had a pretty good year, and you know, we're hopeful that we'll still be here next year. So,
well, as you know, things in the United States have been as quiet as possible.
No hurt here at all. No hurt.
The irony is, I was with Sheila Cavan. I was with these guys when Trump got into power.
Yes, you were. You were at my house that night.
I was at Sheila's house in Atlanta.
I blame Sheila.
Of course.
Yes, and it was just, I mean, when Florida went, I said, I'm going to bed. I'm not going to watch anymore. And then it just flipped and went to Trump. But I mean, I think now that, you know, the birds they're coming home to roost, and it's like, it's I think all the lies and all the deceit and the bullshit is all coming out, and people just know the difference between what is truth and what is lies now. And or some people do. There's a huge education project to go on in the US, I feel, you know, a massive education project. Sometimes I watch the news and I look at people and I think, oh my God, where have you been? Where do you get your information from? Do you know? And it's just frightening, the power. You've seen The Social Dilemma. You've seen that Netflix stuff.
Terrifying.
Oh, terrifying. And it's social media is to blame, you know, in terms of just putting anything on there for money, you know. Absolutely terrifying. So I hope he doesn't start a war with Iran before the 20th of January.
Well, Nancy Pelosi is trying to intervene with that, although she went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff today to see if she could block access to the nuclear codes.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of legal reasons to intervene with that won't happen, but at least they're all aware, although everybody was aware that the Capitol was going to be besieged, and that didn't mean that they were ready.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I could not believe it when I saw that happening. And there was no security there at all, you know. absolutely mind-boggling.
We're done talking about that bullshit. Let's talk about
we gotta close this out pretty quick.
Education project. But did any of you guys see, there was a thing about the National Enquirer that was on TV a while ago? I'm at my parents' house, so I have cable. But it was about all the people who worked for the National Enquirer. And at one point, there was one guy, and they were talking about like, oh, we don't give a shit what we print. And like, it sells copies. It was popular. And then at one point, it was kind of implied that like, you are partially responsible for Donald Trump being elected. And he's like, I don't fucking care. I made money. And I was like, like, hell is empty and all the devils are here.
Yep.
Anyway.
That's a memorable line. You should write that down and use it again.
I know. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming and being a part of this. We appreciate your questions and your attentiveness and
your beautiful faces.
Yeah. And thank you all for your work. Much needed in this time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and thank you to anybody on this call who's involved with organizing and keeping this all going and putting it together. It's a lot of work and y'all are doing a great job.
Yeah.
Amen.
Only like 3-4 months to go.
Oh, man. Yeah.
But we got some exciting stuff coming up, man.
Yeah, we do. It's a great month.
We're having a great time producing this and programming it, and we've everything that we've done thus far is recorded. It's all archived, so you can see it. It's going to live on beyond us. So
yeah, if you're looking for past sessions, because Sketch is kind of funky, what I did is I actually post dated everything to April 9th, and you'll see that they have these little orange bands, these past sessions, and they're scheduled like at 15-minute increments. But when you go into those past sessions, you'll see the links to the pre-records as well as the recordings of the Q&As like today. So yeah, there's a big library there already.
Yeah, that's great.
That's exciting.
Yeah. It looks like me and Curt are facing west and the sun is going down here in the upper Midwest.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna stop this recording here.